leaders of the Council of Asian Liberals and Democrats, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I am pleased, first of all, to welcome all our guests to Sri Lanka for this conference on promoting choice and excellence in education. The Council of Asian Liberals and Democrats was the first grouping of political parties to arrange a political conference in Sri Lanka in 2003, when we were privileged to hear our former distinguished Foreign Minister, Lalith. I'm happy that you have returned now that permanent, sustainable peace has returned to this country. I'm also happy that the Sri Lankan Liberal Party now chairs the council, and I warmly congratulate your new chairman, my long-time friend, Professor Vijay Singh. I must also thank the president of the party, Mrs. Weeratunge, the Secretary General, Mr. Kamal Nissanka, and the officers and members of the party for their wholehearted support to the government of President Mahinda Rajapaksa and its efforts to rebuild a democratic, pluralistic, and a united Sri Lanka. I believe it is perhaps the best-known liberal politician of the 19th century, William Gladstone, who declared that he would always support the masses against the classes. I'm glad that the Liberal Party of Sri Lanka, despite what some would consider having an elitist background, have constantly stood by this principle. In this regard, I would like today to pay tribute to the founder of the Liberal Party, Mr. Chanaka, who was associated with SLFP in the 1980s during the long struggle to restore democracy in this country. Though he belonged to a privileged segment of Colombo and had been associated with the United National Party, he parted company with that party when it resorted to holding a referendum in 1982, which extended for a further 6 years. The parliament first elected in 1977. He then stood firm against the activities of certain unruly politicians from the then government side in launching attacks against our Tamil fellow citizens in 1983. It was then that the Liberal Party became a favoured partner of democratic Tamil politicians such as Neelan Tiruchandran and later too of the democratic Muslim movement led by Mr. Ashraf. Chanaka had an influential hand in the preparation of the manifesto under which Madam Bandaranaike, the first Prime Minister, the woman Prime Minister of the world, contested the 1988 presidential election. Though she lost, it's now widely recognized that the provisions of that manifesto would have helped to restore peace. Chanaka, for instance, believed in devolution, but regretted the enforced merger of the northern and eastern provinces. Unfortunately, by then, the LTT had rejected the Indo-Lankan Accord and begun its relentless destruction of Tamil politicians who stood in its way. In the remaining years of Chanaka's life, though he continued to advocate political reform, he never hesitated to condemn terrorism. Education is my preferred field. I first worked with your chairman when I served in the Ministry of Education, as I mentioned just a few minutes back, and with those kind words, of course. And I continue to do what I can to modernize our system, in particular through the Presidential Task Force on English and Information Technology. So Sri Lanka has a proud record with regard to education, with literacy rates having been over 90% for decades. We recognize that we have much to do if we are to ensure for all our people an education that will allow them to fulfill their potential. But we also recognize that in certain respects we have failed. We have not provided education at the cutting edge to all our people. When His Excellency set up a task force for English and IT, it was in the knowledge that many of our people had been deprived of these skills that are so essential for high-level employment in the modern world. We recognize too that we need to do much better in mathematics and science in most parts of this country, and that achievements in these fields should not be restricted to one particular geographical area. How can this be done in a context in which resources are limited? As mentioned, even with limited resources, We will not stint on those who need them, but at the same time, we must develop new structures that will also harness other resources. We need to promote initiatives in relevant fields. We must encourage different methods of delivery in the classroom. At the same time, we need to ensure excellence, which means that what is taught should be monitored. The state should not do everything in education, but it must make sure that whatever is done benefits our people. We need then to be purely practical in our approach, to look to the usefulness and the employability of the products of various systems. We must encourage different approaches and judge them with an open mind, looking to the end results in terms of benefits to individuals as well as the country. And there is another dimension that should be kept in mind when we talk of excellence. A moral dimension that is particularly important in this country at this stage in time. I refer to the need to bring people together, to promote understanding and tolerance. This cannot be done only through theory. It needs practical applications too. That is why we need to develop systems that can encourage synthesis and synergies. Educational exchanges, long and short-term scholarships, language camps, extracurricular activities that facilitate comradeship, all this must be encouraged. Let me note here that we have to be broad-minded in our approaches. Our recent history suggests that we cannot view problems in simplistic terms. We have in this country not just racial divides, not just linguistic and religious divides, but geographical divides and social divides. These must be bridged holistically, not through the promotion of uniformity, but through understanding and respect. As we have now arrived at a wholly new phase in our history, we need to be looking at education from different and varied perspectives. In this respect, I wish to quote from an address I made to the Colombo University Alumni Association on the theme, Education, where do we go from here? Let me quote. Over a period of time, a lot of tinkering has been done in our system of education at the behest of individuals rather than a body of cohesive and rational thinkers. That has resulted in rather a disjointed system that leaves the student totally unprepared for the world of work that he or she enters on completion of school education. There is much that one learns post-school. Unfortunately, we do not provide the right ingredients during school life so as to enable young school leavers to engage in continuous education. Forget about knowledge and skills. Our system must be able to produce an individual who loves one's motherland. There are certain countries and nations in the world that have distinct characteristics. I just take one such case, the Japanese. We know that Japanese are so well known for their creativity and to be productive. One cannot miss the courtesy of a Japanese, wherever you meet them. Of course, they are also known as a very punctual nations. Machines don't make a nation productive. It's the people that make it so. Secondly, Dr. Noriaki Kano, a professor of management science at the Tokyo Science University and one of the leading teachers of quality in Japan, having worked with many managers of American companies, had advised his students, I quote, Americans tend to go an inch deep and a mile wide. You must learn to go an inch wide and a mile deep. It can be deduced from that much valued advice that we must learn to do fewer things thoroughly rather than many things inadequately. Thirdly, as much as we characterize or identify Japanese through certain well-defined criteria, an attempt must be made to craft a definition for a true Sri Lankan. Some of the major characteristics that I advocate for Sri Lankan are, firstly, to be patriotic, secondly, to be courteous, thirdly, to be disciplined, fourthly, to be punctual, fifthly, to be productive, and lastly, valuing teamwork. There may be many more that can be included here, but this grouping encapsulates the bare essentials. I hope your conference will help us in working out the modalities of how we are to move ahead. The government has an obligation not to let down the masses who voted for His Excellency the President. nor those others who did not vote for him, but whom he now represents and leads. It recognizes the need to provide excellent services, in particular to those who must be helped to recover from the difficulties in which they were plunged through terrorist activity. And to do this, it will build up partnerships and support initiatives that, in providing a better and more rounded educational role, will promote through harnessing the abilities of all our citizens, a united and prosperous Sri Lanka.